Hi, hey, talk about 5 essential tips in helping you make anger your friend. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Sweeney. I have a small business called Extraordinary Relationships, where we help you identify what's an extraordinary relationship for you, and then how do you go about creating it. Now, the 5 biggest tips for anger. Making anger our friend. I've got quite a history with working with anger over a number of decades. I've been on my own lifelong journey around dealing with um, my own anger and my own ways of expressing that and avoiding it. And I've spent many years working with primarily men and also women around working with anger, managing anger, transforming it, violence and conflict, and how to transforming violence and conflict into healthier relationships. So for those of you who are watching now, or for those of you who are watching later, please press the like button, tell me that you're here, write a comment and let me know where you're from, where you're listening to this from. And if you know somebody who would benefit from this, please share it with a friend or share it on your timeline. Now, anger is a big one for most of us. Most of us will experience anger in our life every day, in a weekly basis. We'll experience it in ourselves. We'll experience it around us from others. Being on social media, anger is out there constantly. These days, it seems like you've only got to make a comment or so, and then somebody will come down on you with an angry comment or put down an attack, expressing the way that they feel in a not very healthy manner, which can feel quite attacking inside you and quite demeaning inside you. We've been told lots of stories about anger. Most of us are very afraid of it. We avoid it. We suppress it. We will do anything at all costs to avoid anybody who has a reputation for being angry or expresses anger in an inappropriate way. Many men are terrified of women's anger, and many women are terrified of men's anger as well. And yet anger is neither positive or negative. Most of the connotations, most of the information out there about anger is that it's an extremely negative emotion. One of the ideas I like to get across today is that anger is not a negative emotion. It's not a positive emotion either. It's like most other emotions, if not all emotions, they're neutral. How they are expressed can be done constructively or it can be done destructively. So when it comes to anger and rage and outrage and annoyance and resentment, etc., most of us, if not all of us, have experienced firsthand the very destructive way that anger can be expressed in our relationships, in our family of origins, on social media, in our politics, out on the street, out at night. It can be a very scary emotion, and yet it's a very essential emotion and a very essential feeling as well. So it's the first one. Anger is not positive or negative. It is neutral. The way that it is expressed can be done destructively and it can be done constructively. That's the first tip. The second tip for turning anger into our friend is learning how to express your own anger in a way that is constructive. Most of us are taught with the people in our lives that when they're angry, they suppress it, and so they pretend that they're doing the right thing. Or at the other end of the spectrum, they express it in a loud, forceful, sometimes violent, sometimes emotionally threatening manner, which tends to, we feel threatened by. And so our training from our family of origin and from the community around us can be quite hard to change. So the second thing that we need to learn, which takes time, is to learn that we don't need to shout, to yell, to even express forcefully when we're angry. My modelling when I grew up was that anger was either expressed incredibly loudly and threateningly and violently and terrifyingly, or it was expressed underhandedly, passively, in a very punishing way. I was caught in the middle of that. So it's taken me a long time to learn that my anger does not need, I keep on saying my anger, but it's important that we don't claim it as our own. It's something that moves through us. So the anger that moves through me at times, it's been an important part of my journey in learning not that does not have to be expressed in an eye-popping, loud-voiced, red-faced, sort of fist-thumping manner. It's quite often enough just to say, that really makes me angry. I feel anger when you do this. When you do this, I feel angry. When you, etc. This takes time, and it's not the purpose of this short little video here to teach how to do that. But the second tip is to learn how to do it constructively. And you'll fail a lot along the way, and that's okay. Each time we fail, we learn so we can do it differently next time. And so incrementally, we get better, we get improvements, and we can change the way that we do things, change the way that we express the anger that comes through us into the world, into our relationships. Tip number 3, we need to reframe anger. Anger is essential for our boundaries. Without anger, without having access to our belly, without having access to the energy that comes from our belly and from the energy that comes with anger from our belly, where our no, stop, no, stop, no, stop. We all know people, male and female, whose no doesn't have force behind it, whose when they say stop, it doesn't have force behind it. It doesn't have any oomph behind it. The oomph comes from no. It comes from having access to that belly energy, which is an aspect of anger in itself. So anger is essential for no, stop. We need to have access to that energy to put up strong boundaries. There are people who will come through and try to walk over our boundaries. And it's only by having access to this belly energy, this anger energy, no, that our no will mean something. Our no will be taken seriously. The other positive thing about anger, this is in number 3 as well, is that anger is an essential driver of change. One can argue very easily. Hi, Renee. One could argue very easily that anger is a wonderful, not wonderful, it's a very powerful driver of change. And one could argue that the feminist movements, which started in the late 1800s through to the last 70 odd years, has been driven by the anger of women that's been there for hundreds of years. Some people would say thousands of years. And that anger came through, and over a period of the last 100 years has created enormous change on our planet and on the communities in the Western world and now into the developing world. That anger is developing positive change in the world. 10 or 12 years ago, in the mid-noughties, we had fathers in Australia who were being denied access to their children, denied parenting to their children, and their anger came up to lobby the government, and they drove legislative change to make changes in the family court and government legislation so that they could get access to the children that they love so dearly. And once again, that anger drove social change, and it's continuing to drive social change even today. So it can be expressed constructively, and it's an essential force for change, and it can be an essential force for change in our own lives. When we get frustrated enough, we get angry enough, we're driven to make major changes in our life. We end relationships, we get out of relationships, we make major changes, we put up boundaries to people, we do things differently so that we don't have to experience the feelings and the experience that we're currently experiencing. Sorry to use those two words all the time. Now, before I move on to number 4, please remember, write a comment, let me know where you're coming from and where you're listening to this, watching this from. If you're watching the rebroadcast, I will respond to comments as well. So please make a comment, ask a question, and put it in the comment section there. And I will endeavour to respond to that as well. And please press the like button or the wow button, and just let me know that you're there. Okay, number 4, tip number 4 in turning anger into your friend. Learning about what your own reactivity is around anger when somebody else is experiencing it, somebody else is expressing it. Hi, Renee. Yep, missed 3 to 4. Just quickly going back over number 1 again, that accepting that anger is neither positive or negative. It's actually neutral. It's the way that anger is expressed that can be destructive or constructive. Number 2 is learning to express our anger constructively, undoing the learning, the conditioning that we've got from our family of origin and the culture around us, the schooling, etc., and the community around us in how we deal with anger. Number 3 was that anger is essential for your boundaries, and also it's essential for creating change in the larger world and also in our lives. Number 4 is, when dealing with anger of another person, is learning how you react, having awareness around how you react to other people's anger. For myself, other people, I grew up with a lot of anger in the family relationships when I was a child and teenager and a young adult. So I learned to suppress, I learned to contract, I learned to withdraw, I learned to walk away, I learned to not say anything. So it's taken a lot to learn how to express myself, my anger in a way, the anger that comes through me in a way that can be heard. And to do that, one of my first keys is to learn that to change my reactivity into a positive response. So my reactivity comes from an instantaneous learning from my history, which I can't control. As I bring more awareness to how I react to people being angry around me, I can respond differently. And it's taken me some time, and I'm still learning how to do it, but I'm learning how to respond differently when people are around me who are angry. So in my early days, I would suppress my own anger or walk away or contract from other people who are angry. I've learnt how to hold space for other people when they're feeling their anger and feeling the feelings that go through them. I remember back in the noughties being in a workshop and having a woman in front of me screaming at me, her eyes popping out of her head. Men don't listen to my anger. Men won't hear my anger. Men walk away. They won't let me speak. And so I just continuously stayed there saying to her, I'm here for you. I'm not going to go away. I'm staying here for you. I'm here for you. And that changed. That had a huge impact on her in changing how she experiences her own anger, the anger that's coming through her. So I was able to hold space for her, which a few years earlier, I would not have been able to do that. So I learned how to respond differently. 5, tip number 5 in how to make anger your friend. Learning that it's the vulnerable feelings under the anger that's driving the anger. So once again, it's the vulnerable feelings that's under the anger that's driving it. So you see somebody who's angry, you're angry yourself, you have anger running through you. What's the vulnerable feeling that's underneath it, driving it? The sense of violation, the sense of loneliness, the being disrespected, the being discounted, dismissed, ignored, invalidated, ridiculed, humiliated, shamed, being ostracized, alienated, being excluded, being criticized, judged, put down. All these very hurt, vulnerable feelings, that's what's driving our anger. And I've learnt with myself that when I'm very angry, when I'm feeling anger running through me, I say to myself, and I check inside and I tune inside, what else am I feeling? And it's the expression of the what else am I feeling that just drops the anger immediately. So an example of this in my early days, and this is in the 90s when I was married and I was doing a lot of domestic violence groups, and I was examining myself very closely and how I dealt with the feelings that were coming through me. And quite often when you're in an intimate relationship, we get angry about the silliest things, about these tiny little small things that mean so much to us. And this is an example of one of those little things that has meant so much to me and drove a lot of the anger that I was feeling. We had a water filter in the kitchen. And so every time I would use the water filter, I would fill it up. So I love my partner. I need it for myself. So it was there for her. And so time and time and time again, whenever I went back to this little water filter, it would be empty because my partner hadn't filled it after she had used it. And I found myself getting angry around this. And I was doing domestic violence groups at the time, and so I'm watching myself going, there's something else going on here. I'm being taught about this anger and what's underneath, and I'm watching myself and I'm observing myself, and I'm going, what is going on? What is happening for me? I'm very aware of this anger that's flowing through me, and yet I'm cut off from what else was happening. It took me 10 days of sitting with myself to to get in touch with what else was happening underneath this anger. And what was happening for me is that when I used the water filter, I loved my partner. I was considerate to my partner. I was caring towards my partner, so I would fill it up so it was there for my partner to use as well as myself. So when I went to the water filter time and time and time again and it was empty, to me that meant that I was unloved, uncared for, and I wasn't being considered. Very powerful feelings at the time, which had historical connotations. And once I got in touch with these vulnerable feelings and was able to express those, the anger that I felt around this water filter dropped. It disappeared because I was able to speak and communicate the vulnerable feelings that was driving this reactivity, and I communicated those to my partner, to my wife at the time, and I was able to be heard, and I was able to express and to be heard, and that just dropped and took away the driving force for the anger that I was feeling around that little thing. It's amazing what we feel in relationships and how little things can blow up into big things. So that's 5 tips for turning anger into our friend. So just a recap, and once again, if you're listening to this now, or watching this now, or you're watching the rebroadcast, please write a comment, write a question, let me know where you're coming from, where you're actually watching this from. Press the like button or the love button or the wow button, please, and just let me know that you're there, and I'll do my best to follow up the comments and the rebroadcast as well over the coming days. So once again, for a recap, anger, number 1 there, anger is neither positive nor negative. It's actually a neutral emotion. It's how it's expressed that can be destructive or constructive. And too many of us have experienced anger being expressed destructively. So we need to learn to express. Tip number 2 is learning to express our anger in a constructive way so that we can maximize the possibilities of it being heard and received. Tip number 3, anger is essential for our boundaries, and it's essential for creating change in the world and also in our lives. Our no and our stop means nothing if we don't have connection with our belly energy and our anger energy. No, stop. No, stop. 2 different energies. The last 2 are going to be heard and going to be received with much greater respect and more seriousness. Number 4, when learning what your own reactivity is around experiencing another's anger, and then learning how to change that into a response which is constructive for you both. Number 5, and probably most importantly, is that anger is driven by the vulnerable feelings underneath it. So learn to identify there's a feeling underneath the anger in your belly somewhere, in your body somewhere. Identify there's an energy there. Identify what is the word, what is the name that goes with that energy, and then learning how to express that vulnerable feeling with your partner or out into the world, and then the energy will naturally just lose its power. Bonus tip number 6. You can use the identification here as you get practice and you learn how to identify what's happening with you when you're feeling anger, when anger is pumping through your system. You can do the same when you're faced with somebody else. It is using empathy to get in touch with what's happening for the person under their anger, that's driving their anger, can just drop them down incredibly quickly. You can go from someone with their eyes popping out of their head and they're yelling and they're screaming, their face is red, and if you're validating what's happening underneath, their anger will drop because they've been heard, they've been seen, they've been received. And it's incredibly hard to hear, to receive, and to see somebody who's got their eyes popping out of their head, red face, and they're screaming and they're in that raging place. I've had experiences with this where I've had big men in fathers groups that I've had, and one example was a biker guy, eyes popping out of his head, and I'm just using every bit of empathy that I can to validate how invalidated he feels, judged, put down, excluded, how dismissed he was, how out of control, powerless, etc. And within 10 minutes, he was actually be able to engage with me in a non-emotional way, and his ears were open. So there's bonus number 6. Please let me know in the comments how that was for you and any questions that you might have. Next week, I'm going to be here again for another Facebook Live, and I hope to see you then. Thank you, Renee, and thank you, Marilyn, for supporting me and in listening to this. I hope that was very useful to you. Thank you very much.